University, and we have a special guest this week with us, Professor Chen from China Eastern Normal University. And you might have heard of him in the news recently. He's one of the academics that have been had their visas revoked from Australia, and that surprised me because I'd say Professor Chen Hong is probably one of the nicest people I've ever met, and I would not say he's a danger to Australia anyway, especially since his specialty seems to be in Australian literature, which even Australians mostly don't read. Sorry, that's true.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So
yeah,
how's it been since the news came out for you, Professor Chen?
Yes, the news came first in early August. In early August, I received an email, from Home Affairs advising me that I need to confirm my contact details. Because the email implies that my visa might be cancelled, and they need to send me that email. So at first I thought it was actually one of those spam letters. Sometimes you receive emails like this advising you that your visa is going to expire, and you need to pay a fine and pay it into a bank account, something like that. So I thought it was just one of those, spam letters, and I was about to delete that message. But there might be some kind of sixth sense at play. I'm not sure, but I simply thought, what if it were true? Or, I just want to see, what kind of a ballpark that would be. So I
what are you worth?
Yeah. So I simply sent back a reply, without any salutation. I just said my email address is, my postal address is, something like that. And in 2 days' time, I received email, carrying the formal, notification, advising me that my visa to Australia had been cancelled, and their citing, their grounds they're citing, the email citing was that actually I had been assessed by, ASIO, the Australian Intelligence Organization, to be directly or indirectly a risk to security. So I was really very much surprised. I felt, it's very, perplexed because, as you were saying, that actually I've been engaged in studies of Australia for a long time, in fact, since 1987. And my work had been, concentrating on the writing, books and also academic papers, translation of Australian literature, culture, and writing about Australian society. And of course, I also go into China-Australia relations, but, comprehensively we call it just Australian studies, which is now, one of the disciplines of international studies in a Chinese university. So I teach, for example, like courses. I teach 4 courses this now, related to Australia, and supervise students, master students and PhD students in Australian studies. So that have been, really, something that I think actually I'm one of those, most vocal proponents of better relationship between China and Australia. So to be called a risk to Australia's security, I definitely refuse to accept that assessment. So
100%. Fair enough.
Disappointed. Yeah.
I have to agree on basic character. Like I see that you've just been very vocal about in the past where you've said, they see Chinese students as cash cows, which I totally agree with, because I've seen so many Chinese students that graduate from Australia that can't even speak English. They don't know anything. They just pay the money, and they're just being used to pay money into the Australian economy. And also the fact that it seems like as though Australia's relationship, this is to do with also Australia's relationship with China in general overall, with the Muslim police raid into his house. Do you think that that's linked with what happened there, or?
I myself won't be establishing any link between, the cancellation of my visa with any other incidents, but there have been some conjectures in the press, about my, friendship with Mr. Musselman, who is actually a parliamentarian in the New South Wales Parliament, and also one of his staffers, Mr. Zhang Zhang, But definitely my friendship with both these two persons, have been, above board. It's just, pure friendship. We can be having candid exchanges of our views. Sometimes we will agree with each other. Sometimes we disagree on certain issues. It's just like any true friends are. So there's definitely nothing covert or sinister that might be, interpreted in the friendship between me, myself, and also these two persons. I think actually, if really someone would be making such conjectures and based on such conjectures to cite me as a kind of risk to Australia's security, I definitely would think that this is really a kind of like a outrageous, preposterous, imagination.
Nobody who has said, and well, there we go, Xia Yan, he in Twitter, he was making some accusations.
Yeah, you know who Xia Yan is? He's the editor for Vision Times, 看中国,
Okay, yeah.
And he's been attacking
you. Well, of
you.
course,
he says
he
you're a
didn't
CCP
give any
member
evidence.
Who still retains his party membership to James Lawrensons, Lord Chen. And then he also says, he also commented that the most dangerous people often appear in your circle of best friends at you.
Yeah.
What do you think of that?
Yeah. For me, actually, so far, I think I have received emails and also, messages, from Australia, from those people with whom have got years of friendship, and they all know about me. They all think actually this is a kind of like outrage to allege me to be a kind of a risk to Australia's security. So I think actually this is really a true reflection of their true, understanding and appreciation of me as a person, as a friend, and also as an academic. So, but really, this is really a quite distressful, period of time, because to be accused of being a threat, this is not something funny. And also, for me myself, I have been engaged in promoting the collaboration and joint research between my university and our partner universities in Australia. So that has been seriously disrupted. When I received the notification of the revocation of my visa, I told my university that I can no longer travel to Australia, but of course I'll be still providing counseling, consultation about situations in Australia, but definitely I won't be able to make those trips to Australia. And also to my own research, that will also be a serious disruption. And I do studies and also do translation of aspects of Australia, and that has been really disrupted. My students have been asking me about what had happened, and because in classroom I often talk about Australia as an open multicultural society. But the recent events, for example, during the COVID-19 pandemic, and we have been reading about and seeing on television those incidences that are with racist some kind of racist incidents. I think just recently in Melbourne there was a recent incident. There was a sort of a note with nasty racist remarks posted on the window of a shop window of
and multiple shops got smashed as well in Melbourne.
Terrible. Yeah, and now someone who have been really advocating about the positivities of Australia have been labeled as a threat, risk to Australia. So students will also feel very much confused. So I think actually this is really not really so good to a positive image of Australia. So there's nothing to be afraid of. Some other people were actually also making other conjectures. So some people think that actually it was my friendship with Mr. Moselman or Mr. Zhang Zhang, thinking that actually that might be contributing to the cancellation of my visa, and also some other conjectures were actually implying that because I write quite candidly about China-Australia relations. and they think that actually are being very, critical of some of the policies of Canberra in dealing with China. But really, I think Australia, claims to be a country of press, freedom of the press, so and also freedom of speech. So if actually I can be, punished because of my remarks, this really, would be shattering, this very positive image of Australia as a fair country.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Like having attended those FASIC sponsored classes as well, Australian Studies, I can definitely back you up on that. That Australia's been shown as a very multicultural, sort of vibrant nation with many cultures, and Chinese people can live safely. But that image is slowly deteriorating. So did I cut you off before, Regan? What were you going to ask?
There's been a lot of conjecture and people sort of saying stuff. Mostly I've noticed online, but nobody. It's stopped at the conjecture. There's been no one offering any evidence of anything. It's just, and that seems to be satisfying a certain part of the community. So yeah,
a lot of
I just wanted to make make that clear that there's nothing. These people have been saying all this stuff and nothing to back it up. So we should remember that.
Yeah.
After I received that email from Home Affairs, I wrote back a letter in response to this notification. I said actually I refuse to accept this assessment, and I am ready to be contacted. If any further information is required. I never get any, response. So I'm not sure. Australia always accuses China of being lack of transparency, but really this is also very opaque on the part of Australia. Just simply, imposing that decision on me without making any explanation. I think this is really quite also another disillusionment to me.
So you've asked them to explain the decision, and they still haven't explained.
Yes.
And it's been over a month.
Yes, over months. Yes, that's right.
You could try, I guess, at this point, the only way you can probably get something out of it is a freedom of information request. Okay. That's really interesting because, the narrative since 2016, 2017, but China, Australia has been really driven by a lot of sort of very hawkish types towards China, like, the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, which has obviously been funded by American military industry complexes. Do you think that this is what has sort of spurred the sort of relationship going downhill because of the influence by, certain actors?
Yeah, I think actually there has been some kind of force that has been, at play, trying to poison the bilateral relations because, for example, like in 2017, in mid-2017 in June, when, in Australia there have been this kind of a very, anti-China, this campaign. First it started from the press and also with the think tanks, some of the think tanks, including SP. And later, that's have been influencing the decisions of the government. I think actually that's all those reports actually later, contributed to, a series of anti-China, very, this kind of, measures, against, the normal exchanges and, cooperation between China and also Australia. Even, in the business circle, there have been a kind of, very discriminatory measures, towards Chinese businesses. For example, the recent Manu, bid for acquisition of the Lion Beverages and Drinks corporation.
Yes.
Already Japanese owned. But of course, the business is in Australia, but the ownership was already Japanese. But when China Manu, wanted to make acquisition of it, George Frydenberg, rejected the proposal on the grounds of foreign ownership. So on one hand, it is Japanese owned already. On the other hand, the Chinese proposal of acquisition was rejected, based on this kind of, reasons. I think this is very discriminatory towards China, but really, the bilateral relations have been cemented on, quite close and this kind of a close trade relationship and also investment relationship. So such kind of acts will definitely be damaging to the confidence of Chinese business people in Australia, and that's what really cause negative impact on.
For me,
yeah.
It doesn't make sense because Australia needs China much more than China needs Australia. If you look at trade numbers, so I don't know why. Why is Australia basically shooting itself in the foot to try to appease potentially other interests and losing its own trade over it? It's just very illogical. Because there's that new organization they founded last year called the National Foundation for Australia-China Relations. Have you heard of that, Dr. Chen?
Yes. At first, actually, we were very, we felt this is a positive, development because it indicates the seriousness of the Australian government, in making improvement of the bilateral relations. But obviously, the new foundation had not been, operating, very smoothly, from since the announcement of its establishment. But we still hope that the foundation could be serving as a kind of like constructive force to the bilateral relations, rather than to be used by some anti-China elements, to make further provocations with China. But so far, actually, I think actually I read about the development that the foundation had started, it's to be soliciting proposals for projects funding. So I think actually this hopefully the further developments will be conducive to the improvement of the bilateral relations, rather than providing a platform for anti-China elements to make further attempts to make the bilateral relations to be deteriorating. Yeah.
I mean, Jocelyn Che, who was the former Australia Consul General to Hong Kong, she was she commented that the board had two members that were funded by the US government. One of them is a Falun Gong connected editor called Marie Ma. What do you think of that? Isn't that kind of odd?
I first read about of the composition of the advisory board. I felt indeed a bit surprised because it doesn't include members who have been adopting a more balanced view and also understanding of China. And mostly, even the as you mentioned, this Falun Gong related person, was included in the advisory board to this foundation, which is purportedly to be aiming to improve the bilateral relations. I think this is a very, surprising composition. Of course, I read that actually, a number of people had made, had challenged this composition. Obviously, of course, this is the choice of the Australian government of the DFATs, but definitely we still feel a bit critical about the why, the rationale of such a kind of composition.
Yeah. So what do you think Australia-China relationships can go from now on? Can it get any worse, or is it going to get hopefully start a rebound? Because it really seems like a low point at this time.
Almost I think in the recent months, almost every week we see a new development that actually pushes the relations to a lower point. We used to say it has been actually at the historically lowest point, but there's still lower. It gets still lower. So this is really, we see no prospect of it getting really the bottom and then have a rebounds, this prospects. And with the recent new developments about, for example, as we discussed about the treatment of Chinese journalists, and also about, as I read some of the details of the treatment of the Chinese journalists in Sydney. The Australian authorities had a very rough and almost have been described as a barbaric treatment of those journalists. They simply, barged into their residences, showing them briefly the warrants, and then started searching their residence for 4 to 6 hours. And because it's early in the morning, 6:30, so those journalists were actually asked to get dressed, and when they went to the bathrooms, that had to be done in the presence of the police. And their wardrobe, every piece of clothes had to be thoroughly searched, and their personal phones and also computers, removable, discs, and also recording devices were all, impounded, including an iPad, of one of the journalists' child, was also, taken away. Wow. And after that, they were told not to report about this incident. When the one of the journalists actually, phoned the Chinese consulate, and the reply from the police agent, the federal agents, was that actually, they won't see the Chinese diplomats because they were in operation, in a kind of operation. So that was really a kind of like a very, a kind of a brutal, treatment of Chinese nationals, of those journalists. So far, actually, no serious allegation, no formal allegation have been lodged onto those journalists. The journalists are simply, simply journalists, from the press from China. But such kind of treatment forms a sharp contrast when the two Australian journalists were, interviewed by the Chinese police. Of course, there was this kind of people talk about a midnight knock on the door, but really, in China, in Beijing, in Shanghai, people, especially, people, usually, they really don't often go to bed so early, and midnight is the time actually you really can find someone at home. So I really don't think this is a kind of like a brutal barbaric act on the part of the Chinese police. And it was simply, knocking on the door, telling them, about the decision that actually there will be a interview, and ask them to stay in the city, not to go away until that interview happened. But there was no search of the residents, no search of their phones, not to say impounding, taking or confiscating any personal items.
Yeah.
But so that's really forms a sharp contrast of these two treatments. But in Australian press, you always see the world talking about this Chinese was actually sort of like almost like terrorizing the Australian journalists, almost like expelling them out of China. That was really, really true.
I mean, Bill Birtles is going to be quite a dramatic type of person. Like yesterday, he had a tweet in his Sydney hotel where he could only watch 2 channels, and they're both like anti-Japanese war movies in China. But it turned out of the 50 channels, he chose the 2 Chinese channels to watch. So this is just like watching like a cowboy western or World War II movie. And also, Regan, you saw a video of Vicky Xu harassing a Chinese, like dehumanizing a journalist?
No, I didn't see that.
So a journalist had gone to the front steps of the ASPI building. I guess it's in Sydney. And I'm not sure what they were there to ask questions or just suss it out. Because as you mentioned before, ASPI seems to be much more prominent in the last 6 months than it has been for a while. And its reports are being repeated from media, not just in Australia, but all around the world. So, and just for anyone who doesn't know, they should, ASPI is funded by a bunch of American arms manufacturers. I think they're funded partially by maybe DFAT as well.
Yeah.
So
they also count as Australian Public Service. It's really weird. Like Raytheon, General Electrics, Grumman, all the big, missile systems and stuff. But yeah, so Vicky Xu, she said we shouldn't treat people from Xinhua press as journalists. So we treat them worse than yellow people. So that's really dehumanizing when you have a person from ASPI telling others to treat them as non-journalists, basically not as people. And that's really kind of the general consensus. And she actually got support from that from a lot of Australian Twitter users. And
A lot of
and
Australian
that kind
journalists as well.
makes sense when what you told us, Professor Chen, in relation to the treatment of Chinese journalists in this case. And also, I don't know if you've seen a case where they raided the ABC buildings, the federal police, to
yes.
in relation to Australian war crimes exposure. So it seems like a lot of what Australia is saying now is becoming projection in a way towards China.
Yeah, and also I think actually just today, Peter Dutton made a remark about foreign journalists should be reporting Australia without a slant to a particular community. In other words, according to the principle of freedom of the press and also freedom of speech. But really, Peter Dutton has been imposing that kind of like correctness, a political correctness in relation to how people should be reporting Australia. So this is once again a kind of like quite a shocking, comment, made by the high officials of Australia about press freedom and other, aspects of, the civil society.
Yeah, definitely. And
just one other thing is that I think for a lot of Australians have no idea that those Chinese journalists had their homes raided, because that has not been reported. If it has, it's been a minor footnote in the larger story of how Bill Birtles and Michael Smith were treated. There's no perspective put there. I mean, of course, why would Australian media report negatively about us? So
it's very unfair, the coverage levels.
Exactly.
I agree. Yes, I think actually the report actually was was published by Chinese Xinhua News Agency, Xinhua News Agency in English, and but the details were never made public in the Australian press. Only they have been exaggerating the treatment of the Australian journalists by the Chinese authorities, but just comparatively, you see a sharp comparison of the ways that actually how law enforcement officers in Australia could be treating someone people like this. This is really not just disrespectful, but really not humane. And for their females and also for their children, in the early morning, to be terrorized like this, for 4 to 6 hours.
I mean, in Australia, it's got to the point where, like, anything you say that's pro-China, even if I say as myself personally to close friends, they automatically start rebutting me and say, wait, are you CCP? Are you like pro-China? Why are you so evil? Like, you can't even be pro-China anymore, even to personal friends. And you will get treated like as though you're basically supporting something as bad as Adolf Hitler.
You can't sit on the fence either. Yeah. You can't have no position.
You have to condemn China.
Have to be, yes, you have to be fully on that side, or you'll be chased out and bullied.
And it's
the general depiction of China, I think, has been very much distorted and quite fabricated. If people come to China, you walk in the streets, you see people, you see how people live, you will see very normal society. It's not really as demonized as those press have been depicting about China of being sort of like government was high-handed, some kind of things, people were actually deprived of their freedom. That's simply not true, but actually really because of the press, the distortions and demonizations of the press, people thought actually that was the reality of China, that further exacerbated people's impression of China. I think actually the recent Lowy Institute's poll actually revealed that actually a majority of the Australian population had a negative view of China. But why was that? I think that was because of this really very really wrong, untruthful, depiction of China that's contributed to people's impression of China, and that attitude in turn have been used, to support that anti-China sentiment. So it's a vicious circle that goes, towards a further, worsening of the relations, especially between people and people, among these two, Chinese people and Australian people.
Yeah. Since you've been, covering Australian-China relations for a while, do you think the anti-Chinese sentiment is as bad as, say, when Pauline Hanson first sort of gained popularity in the early 1990s? Or
Yeah.
is it worse now?
Yeah, I think actually when Pauline Hanson first, went into politics at the time, she was still the minorities. The majority of the Australian people, the press were, denunciated her, racist remarks and also attitudes. And even the second time, of her, getting into the federal parliament. Still, she was one of those minorities. I remember once she was pulling up that stance, dressed in a Muslim,
Oh, the hijab.
Yeah.
their hijab. She was really, trying to be dramatic, theatrical, to attract attentions. But that won't really, to be impacting, influencing, or making federal policies towards a group of people or a country. But now, actually, with China, it is really, I think, a kind of like a, concerted attitude, not only in Australia, but also, especially I think, has been in answer to, the anti-China campaign in the United States. Australia has been, a number of Australian commentators and, public figures have been saying that Australia is a mature and independent state. Of course, every nation, every country wants to be independent and mature, but the fact actually has been telling us that actually Australia really has been serving the interests of the United States rather than its own national interests by wreaking havoc, damaging China-Australia relations. It serves no
absolutely
national interest at all. Yeah.
Do you think that the Australian business community is, overwhelmingly sort of pro-China, and there's maybe a friction there with the government, which is influenced by America, or?
Yeah, I think actually the lot of policies, of Australia has been almost like shadowing the policies and also rhetoric of Washington. But in some cases, even Australia goes before pioneering, this anti-China campaign. For example, like the total ban, the blanket ban on Huawei in 2018. Australia was the first country to be imposing, this total ban on Huawei on the unfounded, so far still unsubstantiated, accusation of Huawei was actually, disclosing or transferring data of, overseas generated data back to China. There has been no evidence to point to that, but still, based on such kind of, allegations, unfounded allegations, Australia was actually imposing that total ban on Huawei, the first in the world. And after that,
this is despite with Edward Snowden releasing the NSA spying lines through American technology, and Australia doesn't do anything about American technology, but somehow helps that hegemony,
Yeah, and also afterwards, Australia was actually, Malcolm Turnbull was actually lobbying other countries to follow its suit, Australia's suit, to impose the ban on Huawei. And also this year, actually during the COVID-19 outbreak, Australia was the first country trying to incriminate China by proposing the so-called international independence inquiry, and without actually the involvement of WHO. And China actually supports investigation of the cause, the origin, and also the spread of the virus, but it should be a fair, scientifically based way, not actually sort of like setting up a kind of like a tribunal or kind of like kangaroo court, to
like a narrative where they just want China to fill in the lies. Like Nick McKenzie, he just finds Chinese people that will talk, and to fit in what he's already written, put in the words.
Yeah. So really, as you said, actually there are some kind of narratives already established. Simply the so-called some of the pieces of journalism was simply, providing, ammunitions for those arguments. So rather than, to be drawing conclusions out of the evidence, they try to invent or even try to, really invent, some kind of, the so-called evidence to support their allegations. I think this is really not true journalism. So on one part, actually, there have been a clampdown on people's, frank commentaries of politics. On the other hand, there have been this kind of unleashed, unrestrained, spread of unfounded, rumors, about China, about the Chinese community in Australia, and some other scenarios. This is really, not a very happy time for us.
Yeah, no, not at all. Especially, someone that's Australian Chinese, also from, the Hui minority. It's just very odd because they keep saying China's, Islamophobic, and I've never experienced that in China myself, coming from a very more religious family, and yeah. So basically, I hope relations will get better, but at the moment it seems like China might be part of, the target of a thing called the Quad. Have you heard of that?
Yes. Yes, the quadrilateral dialogue, which has been serving as a basis for the Indo-Pacific strategy, once again also from Washington, with, I think it's a particular aim to contain, suppress, even crush, China's development. I think that this is also, I think Australia has been very much actively involved in this Quad or, Indo-Pacific strategy, and as a way to increase its its volume of on the international stage. China actually welcomes Australia to play a more important part on the international stage. But once again, there should not be targeting China, trying to challenge China, provoke China. Sort of like, I think once actually in one of the opinion pieces in the Australian press, there was some kind of a mentioning about Australia was sort of like standing up to China, like David challenging Goliath. But really, China is not a threat. China is not threatening Australia in any way. Why should actually Australia be making this challenge, and also provocations against China? And usually the rhetoric is actually a very tricky one. Australia can be picking up fights with China, and when China makes any response, usually it's only in rhetoric. Then China is being accused of bullying Australia, of wolf warrior diplomacy. This discourse is that.
Yeah, I mean, they really like that movie. Like I saw it. I thought it was a bit of a joke, and and they really touched onto it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's great having you on, Professor Chen. You're probably very busy, and you really bring some very high-level sort of commentary on this issue. Especially now you're actually really part of this yourself, which is very sad. And I won't be able to have a beer with you anytime soon. Yeah.
Sure. I'm happy to be speaking to you again next time.
Yeah, definitely. Hopefully I'll see you soon. Me and see you in China or Australia. Everything gets better.
Okay. Hopefully, yes. Okay. Thank you very much.
英雄花间意，歌曲人影稀。谁知明日是分离，台上换真心。唱一曲别离，谁在君怀里？昨日相依，今夜又相离，各临相为敌。一出悲喜，众里佳人老矣。为戏幕里英雄美人在交替，笑谈千年。